The immigration officer slid the folder across the desk without looking up. Your extension request has been denied. 3 words. Said like she was reading off a grocery list. Said like Zariah Bennett's entire life wasn't sitting in that folder, reduced to stamps and case numbers and a photograph taken 6 years ago when she still had her mother's earrings and believed paperwork solved problems. Zariah didn't move. She stared at the woman across the desk, Officer Park Soo-yeon, nameplate polished, expression sealed shut, and felt something cold climb up from her stomach into her throat. I'm sorry, Zariah said. Not because she was, because she needed this woman to look at her. Can you tell me what the basis? Your supporting documents were insufficient. The gallery contract you submitted expired. The income verification is 3 months old. Officer Park finally looked up. Her eyes weren't cruel. That was almost worse. They were just tired. You have 48 hours before your current visa status lapses. I'd recommend making arrangements. Zariah's hands were flat on her thighs under the desk. She pressed them down hard. I've lived here for 6 years, she said. I have a studio. I have 48 hours, Ms. Bennett. The folder was pushed back across the desk. Outside the immigration office, Seoul moved the way it always did. Fast, indifferent, gorgeous. Neon signs buzzing over Pojangmacha carts. Delivery bikes threading through pedestrian traffic. The Han River visible between buildings in the distance, silver in the late afternoon light. Zariah stood on the sidewalk with her folder against her chest and didn't cry. She was 34 years old. She had survived her mother's illness, a gallery that dropped her mid-exhibition, 2 apartments that flooded, and a city that took 3 years to let her in. She was not going to cry on a government building sidewalk. She called her friend Minji. Minji picked up on the second ring. How did it go? Zariah heard herself say, denied, and the word sounded like it belonged to someone else. A long pause. Then, come over. I'll make food. I don't want food. I know. Come anyway. Minji's apartment smelled like sesame oil and the vanilla candle she kept burning near the sink. She was already on the phone with someone when Zariah arrived, speaking in rapid Korean too fast for Zariah to catch. She held up one finger, wait, and pointed at the couch. Zariah sat. She looked at the folder in her lap. She thought about 6 years. The neighborhood she'd learned street by street. The language she'd studied until she dreamed in fragments of it. The painting she'd finished last February that had finally started getting international attention. A gallery in Itaewon was talking about a proper solo show. A collector in Berlin had reached out. 48 hours. Minji hung up and sat down across from her. Okay, she said. I talked to my cousin who does immigration law on the side. What did he say? Minji pressed her lips together. There's really only one fast option. Zariah waited. Marriage to a Korean citizen gives you immediate legal standing. A spousal visa can be filed within the window. If it's someone with significant legal status, a business owner, someone with documented ties, it would almost certainly be approved. Zariah stared at her. Minji, I know. You're telling me to get married. I'm telling you what the law says. In 48 hours. Yes. Zariah laughed. It came out wrong. Too sharp. To who? Who exactly am I supposed to call and say, hello, I need a husband by tomorrow? Minji looked at her hands, then she looked up. And the way she looked, careful, deliberate, with that particular expression she used when she was about to say something she'd been thinking about for longer than the conversation had lasted, made Zariah go very still. What? Zariah said. There's someone, Minji said slowly, who might actually say yes. Minji. He owes me. Or his family does, technically. It's complicated. Who? Minji picked up her phone. She turned it around to show Zariah a photograph from a business magazine. A man in a charcoal suit, photographed from a distance at what looked like a charity event. Sharp jaw. The kind of stillness that read as danger even through a camera lens. Zariah read the caption, Kang Jae-hyun, chairman, KH Group. She'd heard that name. Everyone in Seoul had heard that name, and very few people said it out loud unless they had to. Absolutely not, Zariah said. Zariah, he runs half the underground in this city. I'm not... She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her forehead. I'm not calling a crime lord and asking him to marry me. That is not a thing I am doing. He's also one of the largest legitimate property developers in Korea. The man has 12 registered companies and a law firm on retainer 24 hours a day. Minji, you have 48 hours. Zaraya looked at the photograph again. Kang Jae-hyun wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at something past it, and whatever he was looking at had his complete attention in the specific way that expensive, dangerous men gave their attention, like it was a resource being allocated, not freely given. She'd seen him once, 18 months ago. A community art project in Mapogu, a forgotten block of row houses that someone was trying to restore. She'd been commissioned to do a mural. He'd appeared one afternoon with no announcement, no entourage except one man who stayed near the door. He'd stood in front of her half-finished wall for 11 minutes. She'd counted because it unsettled her, a man that quiet looking at something she'd made. When he left, he didn't speak to her, but he'd left a donation that covered the entire project's remaining budget. She'd never told anyone that. "I'm not asking you to fall in love with him," Minji said. "I'm asking you to make a phone call." She made the phone call from the stairwell of Minji's building because she needed to be somewhere small. It rang 4 times. She was preparing for voicemail. "Who gave you this number?" Not a question. A statement delivered in a register that suggested he already knew and was deciding whether to be annoyed. Zaraya's mouth was dry. "My name is Zaraya Bennett. We've met. Mapogu, 18 months ago. I painted the mural on Bukseong Street." Silence. "I have a problem," she said. "And I think I have something you might need, financially. I need to speak with you in person." She made herself slow down. She was talking too fast. "I understand if you say no, but I need an answer before tomorrow morning." Another silence, longer this time. "Where are you?" he said. She told him. 40 minutes, he said, and hung up. She stood in the stairwell with her phone against her sternum and breathed. Her hands were shaking, and she was furious at them for shaking. He arrived in 37 minutes. He came alone, which she hadn't expected. No bodyguards, no car full of men. Just Kang Jae-hyun in a dark coat, standing in the entrance of the small cafe Minji had given as the meeting point, scanning the room once before finding her at the corner table. He sat down. He looked at her. He did not offer his hand or his name or pleasantries of any kind. "Talk," he said. Zaraya thought, "This is the most terrifying thing I have ever done." And then she opened the folder. She explained it plainly. She'd practiced being plain. Visa denial. 48 hours, the spousal visa option. She explained what she could bring to the arrangement, and this was the part she'd spent all evening calculating. She had money. Not her money, but money she had access to, because 3 months ago a collector in Busan had approached her about a private commission and paid half up front, 200 million won, cash deposit, contract signed. She'd been holding it pending the project completion. The project that no longer had a timeline because she'd be on a plane. She slid a bank document across the table. "I know your organization is dealing with a liquidity problem in the Incheon development," she said. She watched his expression not change, which was its own kind of answer. "I'm not going to pretend I understand it fully, but I know that the development stalled 2 months ago and that 3 of your legitimate investors have pulled back because of rumors. 200 million won is not enough to solve everything, but it would demonstrate solvency to hold the deal through the next quarter." Kang Jae-hyun looked at the bank document. He did not touch it. "You researched me," he said. "I'm careful. Where did you get the Incheon information?" "Minji's cousin works property law." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his face. She couldn't name it. "And in exchange," he said, "a marriage. Temporary, legal, convincing enough to pass immigration review. After my permanent residency is established," she had looked this up 3 times. "We can file for dissolution, 6 months to a year. I stay out of your business, you stay out of mine. We appear in public when necessary and make it credible." He looked at her the way he had looked at her mural, that 11-minute way. "You're not afraid of me," he said. It wasn't admiring, it was clinical, like a fact he was recording. "I'm terrified of you," she said. "I just don't have the time to let that change my decision." He almost smiled. It didn't reach anything. It was a small, involuntary thing that came and went in under a second. He looked at the document again. "I have one condition," he said. She waited. "You can have my name. You can wear my ring." He looked up. His eyes were very dark and completely direct. But never mistake this for love. Zariah held his gaze. Agreed, she said. He slid the document back across the table. He stood. He buttoned his coat. Pack what you need tonight, he said. You move in tomorrow morning. The lawyer will meet us at 10. He glanced at her. I'll handle the paperwork. He left. Zariah sat in the corner of the cafe with her cold coffee and her folder and the bank document and the particular silence that follows a decision that cannot be undone. She told herself, this is practical. This is survival. This is what people do. She did not tell herself it was safe. She wasn't stupid. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photograph from the magazine again. The way he stood at the edge of a charity event, looking at something past the camera. Something no one else in the photograph was looking at. She'd always wondered what it was. She supposed she would find out. Her apartment was a studio in Mapogu, 3 floors above a dry cleaner, small enough that she'd learned to paint in shifts because she couldn't step back far enough from a large canvas. She'd lived there 4 years. The landlord had once brought her persimmons from his mother's garden. The woman across the hall played trot music every Sunday morning and always apologized and never stopped. Zariah packed 2 suitcases and a portfolio case. She packed her grandmother's scarf. She packed the small framed photograph of her mother that lived on the windowsill. She sat on the edge of her bed at 2 in the morning and looked at her apartment. 6 years. This whole small life. She thought about Officer Park Soo-yeon's face. 48 hours. Said like a clock. Said like time was something that happened to people who made poor decisions. She thought about Kang Jae-hyun's eyes. Never mistake this for love. She thought, I know exactly what I'm doing. And then she thought, I have no idea what I'm doing. Both of these things were true. She was old enough to know that was usually how the most important decisions worked. She picked up her mother's photograph, set it carefully in the top of the suitcase. Okay, Mama, she said quietly. Okay. She zipped the bag. In the morning, a black car arrived at 7:53. The driver was a man of about 50 with a face that expressed nothing but efficiency. He loaded her suitcases without being asked. He did not make conversation. The drive took 22 minutes. Zariah watched Seoul past the window and tried to memorize it the way it looked right now, before everything changed. The pojangmatcha owners lifting their carts into morning position. The school children in uniforms. The old men with their hands folded behind their backs, walking the same routes they'd walked for 40 years. She'd fallen in love with this city slowly, the way you fall in love with a person. Against your expectations. In spite of yourself. Detail by detail. Until one day you look up and realize you can't imagine living anywhere else. She was not going to lose it. The car pulled through a gate. The building ahead was not what she'd expected. She'd expected something cold and deliberate. Glass and silence. She got something older. A converted modernist structure set back from the road. Serious without being ostentatious. The kind of architecture that didn't need to impress anyone because it had never needed to. The driver opened her door. Zariah stepped out. She looked up at the building. Kang Jae-hyun was standing at the entrance. He was in a dark suit, no tie, coffee in one hand. He looked like a man reviewing his schedule for the day, not like a man whose life was also about to change. Which was either because he was very good at appearing unbothered or because it genuinely didn't bother him. She walked toward him. Lawyer's here, he said. 40 minutes. Good morning to you too, she said. He looked at her. A brief searching look. Then he stepped aside to let her through the door. Your room is on the 3rd floor, he said, walking ahead. There's a studio space off the east wing. It doesn't get good afternoon light, but the morning light is consistent. She stopped walking. He noticed and turned. You have a studio space, she said. The building has a studio space, he said. It hasn't been used. He said it the way he said most things, directly, flatly, as though the information was just information. I assumed you'd need somewhere to work. Zariah looked at him. He had already turned away. She followed him and thought, this man noticed I paint 18 months ago on a street in Mapogu, and he remembered. She did not say this out loud. She tucked it somewhere quiet. The lawyer arrived at 9:58. The paperwork took 2 hours. Zariah signed things she read 3 times each because she was not a woman who signed things she didn't read. And Kang Jae-hyun sat across the table and waited with the specific patience of someone who had spent years waiting for people to catch up to him. When it was done, she was, legally, Mrs. Kang. She looked at her own name on the document. She thought, the worst rules are the ones that we're never going to hold anyway. She didn't know why she thought that. She put it away. Outside the lawyer's office, the city hummed and moved. Above them, the sky had gone the color of old silver, that particular Seoul winter gray that meant nothing bad and nothing good. Just weather, just the city continuing to exist in its enormous, indifferent way. She had a home here. She was going to keep it. That was the only thing she needed to know right now. The marriage certificate was still in her bag when they got back. Zoraya hadn't moved it. She wasn't sure where to put it. It didn't feel like something you filed away in a drawer next to utility receipts, but it also didn't feel like something you framed. It was just paper. Paper that had rearranged her entire life in the space of a morning. The house. She was already correcting herself. Not house, building. Kang Jae-hyun did not live anywhere that could reasonably be called a house. Was quiet in the way that very large spaces are quiet. Not peaceful, just empty of the sounds that would make it feel occupied by actual people. No music, no television. The particular silence of a place where someone had spent years alone and stopped noticing. A woman named Mrs. O managed the household. She was somewhere between 55 and 70, small and precise, with hair pulled back so tight it looked load-bearing. She showed Zoraya to her room on the third floor without making eye contact, explained where the laundry was collected, where meals were served, and what the Wi-Fi password was, all in the same tone used to brief a new employee. "If you need anything," Mrs. O said, "there is an intercom." "Thank you," Zoraya said. "I'm Zoraya." Mrs. O looked at her. "I know who you are." Then she left. Zarya stood in the room alone. It was large and well-appointed and utterly without personality. The kind of room designed by someone who understood comfort but had no interest in warmth. The bed was made with military precision. The curtains were the color of nothing in particular. There was a desk and a chair and a closet large enough to walk into and absolutely nothing on any of the walls. She unzipped her suitcase. She took out her mother's photograph and set it on the desk. It immediately made the rest of the room look emptier. She unpacked slowly, methodically, the way she did everything she didn't want to think too hard about. Clothes on hangers, toiletries in the bathroom, sketchbooks stacked on the desk beside the photograph. Her grandmother's scarf folded on the foot of the bed. When she was done, she sat in the chair and looked out the window at the garden below. Someone maintained it. There were structured plantings and a stone path that led to a wall. Everything was very correct and very considered and looked like it had never been touched by anyone who just wanted to sit on the grass. She thought, 6 months, maybe 12. Then I file the paperwork and I get my permanent residency and I go back to my studio and my life. And this will just be something that happened. She was good at thinking in timelines. It was how she'd survived everything else. She didn't see Jae-hyun for the rest of the day. Dinner was served in a dining room that seated 12. Mrs. O set 2 places at one end of the table, which meant Zarya sat 6 feet away from an empty chair and ate alone, while someone in the kitchen she never saw made food that was technically perfect and practically silent. She was halfway through when she heard footsteps in the hall. Jae-hyun appeared in the doorway. He was still in the suit from that morning, but the jacket was gone. He looked at the table. He looked at her. He looked at the empty chair across from her. "You didn't eat," she said. "I ate at the office." Mrs. O made enough for 2. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to the chair and sat. He didn't take any food. He poured himself water and looked at the table in the way of a man going through a mental checklist. "The legal team filed the spousal visa application this afternoon," he said. "The immigration interview will be scheduled within the next 3 to 4 weeks." "Okay," Zoraya said. "They'll want documentation of a shared life, photographs, correspondence, people who can speak to the relationship." He looked up. "We should discuss the story. The story. What we tell them, how we met, when it became more than what it was." He said the phrase like it was a technical term, which she supposed to him it was. Zoraya put her chopsticks down. "We met in Mapogu, 18 months ago. I was painting the mural on Bukseong Street." He was still. "You came one afternoon. You stayed for about 11 minutes. You didn't introduce yourself, but you left a donation that covered the rest of the project." She watched him. "I didn't know who you were until a week later when Minji told me. I thought you were just some guy who liked murals." Something moved behind his eyes. That part, she said, is true. The rest we can figure out. He was quiet for a long moment. You remember how long I stayed? I count things when I'm nervous, she said. It's a habit. He looked at her in that particular way again, the 11-minute way, like he was recording a fact. We should be seen together, he said finally. Before the interview, public events, dinner, things that can be documented. He said documented the way most people said remembered, which told her something, though she wasn't sure yet what. Fine, she said. When? Friday. There's a foundation dinner. It will be attended by people whose opinion matters legally. Okay. He stood. Sleep well. He left. Zoraya looked at his untouched water glass. She looked at the empty chair. She thought, this man sat down in a dining room at the end of his day, not because he was hungry, but because he was being thorough. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it next to the studio space and the 11 minutes and left it alone. On the second day, she found the studio. It was off the east wing, as he'd said. A large room with north-facing skylights, bare concrete floor, and 3 walls that had at some point been used for hanging things, based on the hook marks. The morning light came in clean and even, the kind of light she would have paid extra rent for in Mapogu. She stood in the middle of it and understood, in her body rather than her head, that this was going to be a problem. Because a man who noticed light, who thought about what a painter would need, who preserved a space specifically because the light was consistent, was not the simple transaction she needed him to be. She set up her materials anyway, because she needed to work, because the alternative was sitting in that blank room counting things, and that was worse. She was 3 hours into a canvas when she heard the door. Not Jae-hyun. A young man, early 20s, in a dark jacket with the careful blankness of someone professionally trained not to react to things. He bowed slightly. Mr. Kong asks if you would like lunch brought here or in the dining room. Zoraya looked at her hands, paint to the wrist. Here is fine, she said. Tell him thank you. The young man, she later learned his name was Yoon, that he'd worked for Jae-hyun for 3 years, that he was 24 and had a younger sister in Daegu he sent money to every month, nodded and left. Lunch arrived. She ate standing at the window. She thought about what she was painting. She thought about what she wasn't painting. She thought about the empty dining room the night before, and the way Jae-hyun had sat in a chair he hadn't intended to sit in and said sleep well, like it cost him something. She thought, I need to stop thinking about him like a subject. She looked at the canvas. She realized with a particular sinking feeling already painting him. Not his face, just a shape. A man at the edge of something, the specifics indistinct, the posture that particular combination of control and exhaustion. She'd painted it without deciding to. She turned the canvas to face the wall. Well, Friday came faster than she wanted. The foundation dinner was held at a hotel in Gangnam that made no effort to look like it was trying. Everything was exactly right, in the way that only very expensive things managed. The kind of careful that looked effortless, which Zoraya knew from 6 years in Seoul required enormous amounts of money and work to achieve. Jae-hyun was waiting for her at the base of the stairs. He looked up when she came down, and something in his face reorganized itself so quickly she might have imagined it. She was wearing a deep rust-colored dress she'd brought to Korea 3 years ago for an opening she'd ended up missing. It fit the same. She'd put her hair up. She was wearing her grandmother's earrings because they were the most expensive-looking things she owned, and also because she needed something that felt like home. He said nothing about how she looked. Ready, she said. We'll enter together, he said. Stay close. If anyone asks how we met, Mapogu, 18 months ago, if they push, I know how to talk to people, she said. He looked at her. These aren't people. They're watchers. I know how to talk to watchers too. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite concession, something adjacent to it. They entered together. What happened next was something she hadn't fully prepared for. She'd prepared for scrutiny. She'd prepared for questions and the particular cold curiosity of powerful people encountering something they hadn't been briefed on. She'd prepared for Jae-hyun to be silent and her to carry the conversation. She hadn't prepared for what it felt like to walk into a room next to him. It wasn't power exactly, though power was part of it. It was the specific gravity of a man who had decided that every room he entered would rearrange itself around him, and had been right about that for long enough that it was simply true. People noticed him before they registered anything else. And then they noticed her, which produced a sequence of expressions she was used to in Korea, a brief recalibration, the replacement of one assumption with another, but in this context the expressions resolved differently than they usually did. They resolved into something that looked like assessment. She was his wife, which meant she was either an asset or a vulnerability. She felt people deciding which. A man in his 60s approached within 3 minutes. White hair, good suit, the careful bonhomie of someone who had learned early that warmth was a social tool. Jae-hyun, the man said, and then he looked at Zoraya in the way you look at something that requires explanation. Chairman Lim, Jae-hyun said, my wife, Zoraya. Chairman Lim shook her hand. His grip was exactly calibrated. An artist, I hear. That's right, she said. Jae-hyun mentioned you, briefly. He smiled. He doesn't mention people. I'm flattered, she said, and smiled back, and meant none of it and showed none of that. Jae-hyun put his hand at the small of her back. Light pressure. Professional. A reminder. We are performing. She felt it as a current anyway, which was information she didn't want, and filed away under things to examine later, much later, possibly never. The evening proceeded. She met 12 people and remembered all of them because she was good at people. She talked about her work when asked, redirected when she needed to, held Jae-hyun's arm when it was useful, and stood slightly apart when it wasn't. She watched him work the room and understood for the first time the particular texture of his public self, how he deployed silence as influence, how he made people feel attended to without offering them anything real, how the stillness that had unsettled her in the cafe was, in a room full of competing egos, profoundly effective. On the way home, in the car, she said, Chairman Lim doesn't trust you. Jae-hyun looked at her. He watches your hands, she said. Most people watch your face. He watches your hands. A beat. He and my father had a disagreement before my father died. He believes I share the position. Do you? A longer beat. What was his tell? His smile is fine, but when he thinks no one is looking, his jaw goes tight on the left side. She looked out the window. He was also talking to 2 other men tonight who showed up separately but kept ending up in the same corners. They weren't together, but they kept checking the same sight lines. The car was quiet for a moment. You spent the evening mapping the room, Jae-hyun said. I'm a painter, she said. I notice things. He was quiet. Then, the 2 men are connected to an investment group trying to take over the Incheon development externally. He said it carefully, like he was deciding how much to give. They've been circling for 6 weeks. They were watching you check their sight lines, she said. They know that you know they were there. His jaw moved. Yes. So they'll move faster now. He looked at her. The streetlights moved across his face in sequence. Light and shadow, light and shadow. Yes, he said. They will. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Zarya heard it through the wall. Not the words, just the tone. Jae-hyun's voice at that hour had a different quality than his voice in daylight. Lower, stripped of the careful calibration. She lay in the dark and listened to something she couldn't parse and told herself it wasn't her business and stared at the ceiling. At 2:40, she heard footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside her door. She waited. They didn't continue. He just stood there. For about 30 seconds. She could feel it, the particular weight of someone on the other side of a door deciding something. Then the footsteps moved away. She sat up. Her heart was going faster than it had any reasonable cause to. She sat in the dark for a while and thought about the outline of a man in the hallway making a decision that she was, deliberately, not part of. In the morning, she came downstairs and found him at the kitchen table with 3 folders open and a coffee that had gone cold. He looked up. His eyes were the eyes of a man who hadn't slept. The Incheon investors filed an emergency injunction at midnight, he said. If it holds, the development is frozen. The legitimate side of the business takes a significant hit. He looked back at the folders. My legal team is on it. Zoraya poured herself coffee. She sat down across from him, not at the other end of the table, close enough to see the documents. Show me, she said. He looked at her. Not the legal strategy, she said. I'm not a lawyer. Show me the project, what it is, what it's supposed to be. He was quiet for a moment that stretched. Then he turned one of the folders and slid it across. It was a development proposal, mixed use, residential, art spaces, community infrastructure, built around an existing neighborhood in Incheon that was being hollowed out by displacement. The plans were ambitious and specific in a way that surprised her. Not just buildings, but thought about what the buildings were for, who they were for, what would keep people there instead of pushing them out. She looked at it for a long time. This is a good project, she said. It was my father's idea, he said. And the way he said it, flat, quick, like biting down on something, told her that was the end of that particular sentence. She looked at the plans. You have a presentation for the investors, something visual. A deck, standard. Is it working? He said nothing, which was an answer. She looked at the folder. She looked at the project plans. She looked at the community assessment buried in the back. Interviews with residents, photographs of the neighborhood, a survey of what people said they needed. Someone had done real work here. Someone had cared enough to ask. Let me help, she said. He looked at her. You're an artist. I'm an artist who has spent 6 years living in neighborhoods exactly like this one, she said. And I can make something that makes people feel what this project is. Not a deck. Something else. Give me 3 days. The injunction hearing is in 5. 3 days, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something worked behind his eyes that she couldn't follow. 3 days, he said. She worked. She barely slept. She pulled the community assessment apart and rebuilt it as something visual, not polished, not corporate, raw. Photographs she selected herself, printed large. A hand-drawn map of the neighborhood with annotations from the resident interviews. A timeline showing what had been there and what was being lost and what could be preserved. On the second day, Jae-hyun came to the studio at 11 at night. He stood in the doorway the way he had that first day on Bukseong Street. She was on the floor surrounded by printouts and didn't look up. You should sleep, he said. So should you. He came in. He looked at what was spread across the floor. He was quiet for a long time. This woman, he said, pointing at one of the photographs. An older woman outside a shop. Her family has been in that building for 40 years. I know, Zariah said. It's in the assessment. My father interviewed her personally. He said it to the photograph, not to her. She told him the neighborhood smelled like her childhood. He wrote that down. Zariah stopped moving. That's what the project was for, he said. Not the revenue. He stopped. His jaw tightened. He looked away from the photograph. It doesn't matter. It does matter, she said. He looked at her then. And for a moment, just a moment, the kind that exists and then immediately tries to unexist, the thing he kept behind his face wasn't behind it. It was right there, every year of it. He looked away first. Finish, he said. I'll tell the legal team to prepare for the visual component. He left. Zariah sat on the studio floor and looked at the photograph of the woman outside her shop for a long time. She thought about a man who had stood on a street in Mapogu for 11 minutes looking at a mural of a neighborhood people were forgetting. She thought about what it meant to care about something you couldn't say you cared about. She turned back to her work and didn't let herself think about what else she might be doing. On the third day, she finished. On the fourth day, Jae-hyun's legal team presented the material to the investment group's representatives. Zaria wasn't there. She'd been explicit about that. She wasn't part of his business. The work was the work. Take it or leave it. He called her at 4 in the afternoon. He never called her. They communicated through Mrs. O or Yoon or the dining room. She picked up. It held, he said. The injunction was withdrawn. The investors came back to the table. She exhaled. The project director said the community material was... A pause. He said it was the first time investors cried during a presentation. Good, she said. A beat. Thank you. She didn't know what to say to that. Coming from him, those 2 words had the weight of something that had never been said before and wasn't sure of its footing. You're welcome, she said. She hung up and sat in the studio with the afternoon light coming through the skylights and felt something she didn't want to name shifting in her chest like weight redistributing. The problem arrived 9 days after she moved in the form of a woman named Han Seo-yeon. She appeared on a Tuesday morning in the front hall, wearing a coat that cost more than Zoraya's first car, and an expression that managed to be entirely pleasant while communicating a precise and detailed contempt. She was in her mid-40s, beautiful in the way that required both money and attention, and she looked at Zoraya the way people look at something that has ended up in the wrong room. "You must be the wife," she said, in English that was perfect and pointed. "I am," Zoraya said. "I'm Seo Yeon." She smiled. "Jae-hyun and I have known each other for 15 years, since before he was all of this." She gestured vaguely at the building. "I was very surprised to hear he'd married." "Most people were," Zoraya said. Seo-yeon looked at her with the careful thoroughness of someone completing an assessment. "He moves quickly when he wants something. I suppose that's one of his qualities." The smile again. "I hope you understand what you've married into." "I think I'm getting a clear picture," Zoraya said. Seo-yeon's eyes went to the studio doorway. Zoraya's materials visible through the open door, the canvas she was working on, the unmistakable evidence of occupation. Something moved through her expression that she controlled fast, but not fast enough. "He gave you the studio," she said. "It was offered," Zoraya said, a beat. "He hasn't let anyone into that room in 4 years." Zoraya said nothing. Seo-yeon looked at her for a moment longer. Then the smile came back, smaller this time, and she said, "Do tell Jae-hyun I stopped by. He'll know what it's about." She left. Zoraya stood in the front hall for a moment. Then she went to find Mrs. Oh. "Who is Han Seo-yeon?" she said. Mrs. Oh looked at her with that expression that was the absence of all expression. "She is a business associate of Mr. Kong's. Previously she was closer." "How close?" Mrs. O was quiet for just long enough. "They were engaged briefly, 4 years ago, before Mr. Kong's father died." Zarya absorbed this. "And after?" "After," Mrs. O said carefully, "things changed." That was all she would say. That evening, Zarya waited until Jae-hyun came home. She met him in the hall before he could go to his office and close the door. "Seo-yeon came today," she said. He stopped. Something in him went very still in a different way than his usual stillness. Colder. "What did she say?" he said. "She was polite," Zoraya said. "Very politely she told me she has 15 years of history with you and implicitly suggested I don't know what I've gotten into." She held his gaze. "She also noticed you gave me the studio and seemed surprised by that." His jaw moved. "She has no business here." "She said to tell you she stopped by, that you'd know what it was about." Zoraya paused. "Do you?" He looked at her. "Yes." "Are you going to tell me?" A long silence, the kind that had weight. "She's connected to the investment group that filed the injunction," he said finally. "She fed them the information about the liquidity problem." His voice was even, controlled. But beneath the control there was something that had been burning for a while. "She is the reason the Incheon project nearly collapsed." Zoraya felt the sentence land. "Someone you were engaged to," she said, "betrayed the project your father started." "Yes." "And she came here today." "To see you," he said, "to assess what you are to me, whether you're something she can use." He looked at her directly. "She came because she's still working against me and she wanted to know if my wife is a weakness." The word hung in the air. Weakness. Zoraya thought of the rule he'd made in a cafe over cold coffee. Never mistake this for love. She thought of the studio and the morning light and the photograph of the woman outside the shop in Incheon. She thought of footsteps stopping outside her door at 2:40 in the morning. "Am I?" she said. He looked at her for a moment that stretched past comfort, past performance, past everything they'd agreed this was. "Go to bed, Zoraya," he said. He went into his office and closed the door. She stood in the hall and felt the specific quality of an answer that wasn't a no. Which was, she understood with a clarity that settled into her bones, cold and certain, exactly the problem. Because she was starting to wonder what her own answer would be if someone asked her the same question. And she didn't have a rule that covered that. She didn't sleep well. She hadn't slept well since the second night in this building, if she was being honest with herself, which she was trying to be because dishonesty was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. She lay in the too large bed in the too quiet room and stared at the ceiling and listened to Seoul existing outside the window and thought about a man standing in a hallway at 2:40 in the morning deciding something she wasn't part of. Am I a weakness? He hadn't said no. She turned onto her side. Her mother's photograph was a dark shape on the desk. Outside, a car passed. The city breathed. She thought about Han Seo-yeon's face when she'd seen the studio door open. That flicker, fast, controlled, gone, of something that wasn't quite jealousy and wasn't quite grief but lived in the same neighborhood as both. 15 years. An engagement. And then Jae-hyun's father died and things changed, and now she was feeding financial intelligence to investment groups trying to dismantle a community development project that a dead man had cared about. That wasn't business. That was personal dressed up in business clothes. Zaria understood that kind of hurt. She didn't excuse it, but she understood it. She finally fell asleep somewhere around 4 and dreamed about nothing she could remember. In the morning, she found a folder on the kitchen table, not placed there by Yoon, not delivered by Mrs. O. Just there, with her name written on the outside in handwriting she recognized from the legal documents. Compressed, deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had been taught precision. She opened it. Inside was the immigration interview confirmation, scheduled for 3 weeks out, and beneath it, a single sheet of paper with a list, dates, places, details. February 14th, charity auction, Mapo Cultural Center. You bid on the piece by the sculptor from Jeju. I noticed you because you were the only person in the room who looked at the work instead of the price. She read it twice. He'd been constructing their story, their real story, or the closest version of real that existed between them. He'd pulled details from actual moments and assembled them into a narrative the immigration officer would believe because it wasn't entirely false. She sat with the paper for a long time. Then she picked up a pen, turned it over, and wrote at the bottom, "You forgot that you left before the auction ended. The sculptor's piece sold to someone else. You would have won." She left it on the table and went to the studio. An hour later, Yoon appeared in the doorway. He was holding the paper. His face was doing nothing professionally. "Mr. Kong asked where you got the auction information," he said. "I was there," she said without turning from her canvas. "I saw him. He didn't see me." A pause. "He says, Yoon stopped, started again. "He says you should add it to the file." "Tell him I already did." Yoon left. She painted for another 3 hours and did not think about the fact that they had apparently been circling each other, in the same rooms, at the same events, for over a year before any of this happened. She did not think about what that meant. She applied paint to canvas and thought about color and light and the way rust bleeds into ochre if you let it and nothing else. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday. She was in the studio. It was mid-afternoon. She heard Jae-hyun's voice somewhere in the building. Not the words, not the tone she'd started learning to read, but something different. Something that made her set her brush down. She found him in the hall outside his office. He was on the phone and his hand was pressed flat against the wall and his head was down, and she knew, from the set of his shoulders, that something had broken. He ended the call. He didn't move for a moment. "Jae-hyun," she said. He turned, and whatever she'd expected, the sealed face, the controlled register, wasn't what she got. He looked at her, and what she saw was a man who had just been hit somewhere he hadn't guarded. "The immigration authority contacted my legal team," he said. "There's been an anonymous report alleging the marriage is fraudulent. They're launching a preliminary investigation." The floor didn't move. It felt like it should have. "When?" she said. "Filed yesterday." He looked at the phone in his hand. "They have specific details. The timeline of our marriage, the financial arrangement." His jaw tightened. Details that only someone who knew about the original agreement would have. Zaria's mind moved fast, faster than she'd have liked, because it went immediately and without detour to one place. "Seo-yeon," she said. "I don't know that yet." "She came here 3 days ago," Zaria said. "She assessed the situation. She knew about the studio. She would have talked to someone on staff or—" She stopped. "How many people knew about the original arrangement?" "4, he said. "My lawyer, my financial director, Minji." He paused. "And Seo-yeon, because my financial director spoke to her investment contacts 2 weeks before you came to me. trying to find alternative solutions for the Inchin problem. She would have known I was looking for capital. Zarya felt the architecture of it assemble itself. She knew you needed money. Then I appeared. Then we married fast. She put it together. Yes. What does the investigation mean? She said. Practically. Because panic was a waste of time and she needed to know the shape of the problem before she could do anything about it. They'll interview both of us separately, he said. They'll look for inconsistencies. If they determine the marriage was entered into solely for immigration benefit, with no genuine relationship component, your visa application is denied permanently and you face a 5-year bar from re-entry. He met her eyes. I face fraud charges. The word fraud sat in the air between them. Zarya breathed. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, and the word in his mouth sounded like he didn't know what to do with it. We prepare, she said. We've been building the file. We have photographs from the foundation dinner. We have, she thought fast, the studio, the auction detail you documented, the community project material I made. She straightened. We have 3 weeks before the interview. That's enough time to build something that holds. He looked at her. They'll separate us, ask the same questions from different angles and look for gaps. Then we close the gaps. Zarya. He said her name in a way he hadn't said it before. Not directive, not informational, something closer to, she didn't know what. If this falls apart, you go home. That's the reality. I know the reality. Do you? He said. And the question was not rhetorical. She held his gaze. I'm not going to fall apart on a government interview because some woman with a grudge made a phone call. I've been holding things together since before you knew my name. So tell your lawyer to prepare, tell me what questions they'll ask, and let's close the gaps. He looked at her for a long moment. Something worked through his expression that she was starting to be able to read in the same way she read a half-finished canvas, not by the surface, but by what the surface was covering. Come to my office, he said. I'll show you the legal brief. They worked until nearly midnight. The legal brief was thorough and frightening in equal measure. The investigator assigned was known for dismantling fraudulent arrangements specifically, a woman named Director Choi, who had a documented success rate that his lawyer had included, unhelpfully, at the top of the second page. They went through every question in the expected framework. How did you meet? When did you first realize the relationship was more than professional? Describe a moment that changed things for you. What do you know about each other's families? Habits. Fears. That last category was where things got difficult. Habits, Zarya said. You eat at the office, but you always come home before 11. You don't drink more than 1 glass of anything. You read physical documents instead of screens, which is why your desk always has 3 open folders. He was looking at her. You, he said carefully, leave your brushes in water too long when you're thinking about something else. You count things when you're nervous. You put everything at the bottom of your suitcase except your mother's photograph, which goes on top. She was very still. Mrs. O told you about the photograph, she said. No, he said. I carried one of your bags upstairs, the first morning. The room was very quiet. She looked at the legal brief. She said without looking up, Fears. He was quiet for a moment. You're afraid of becoming invisible, of doing your work and having it matter to no one. Not because you need fame, because you need proof that something you made reached someone. He said it factually, carefully, like someone reading coordinates. You've been afraid of that longer than you've been in Korea. Zarya's hands were flat on the table. She said, You're afraid that everything your father built will collapse, and it will be because of something you did or didn't do. You're afraid that being the person who protects the empire means becoming someone who can't be protected by anyone else. She looked up. And you're afraid that you've already become that person. The silence had a texture. Jae-hyun looked at the table. He looked at the legal brief. He looked at his hands. These are sufficient answers, he said finally. Yes, she said. They are. Neither of them said what they both understood, that the answers were sufficient because they were true, and that truth had arrived in this office, at this table, at nearly midnight, without either of them inviting it. The next morning, everything broke open. Zarya was in the studio when she heard it, raised voices from the direction of the main hall, which was unusual because this building did not accommodate raised voices. She set her brush down. She listened. One voice was Jae-hyun's, stripped of its careful calibration. The other she didn't recognize. She came out of the studio. In the main hall, Jae-hyun was facing a man she'd never seen. 50s, expensive suit gone slightly wrong at the collar, face flushed with something between anger and fear. Between them stood Yoon, who was trying to be a wall and not succeeding. "You don't understand what you've involved yourself in," the man was saying. His Korean was fast, and Zariah caught maybe 70% of it. "The Incheon deal is done. The group has already filed secondary documentation with the municipal authority. You can fight the injunction withdrawal, but the secondary filing supersedes." "Get out of my house," Jae-hyun said. "Your father made promises," the man said, and his voice cracked on it. "Before he died. He promised the development rights would be shared. You killed that the moment you consolidated." "My father's agreements," Jae-hyun said, very quiet now, the kind of quiet that was more dangerous than shouting, "do not extend to people who went behind his back while he was dying and tried to strip the project before the body was cold." He took one step forward. "Get out." The man looked at Zariah, directly at her, which was strange, which made the back of her neck go cold. "Ask your wife," the man said, "what her connection to this is. Ask her who she called before she came to you." The hall went absolutely silent. Jae-hyun turned, slowly. Zariah looked at the man. Her heart was hitting her ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Park Jin-ho," the man said, "the collector from Busan, the commission, 200 million won." He looked at her with something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived next to it. "Jin-ho is one of our principal investors. He commissioned your work 6 months ago. The money you used to come to Kang Jae-hyun as a solution to the Incheon problem, that money came from the same investment group that's been trying to take the development for 2 years. The room tilted. Zariah heard herself say, "That's not true." "Check the account trail," the man said. "Jin-ho's commission payment cleared through a shell account registered to Daewha Capital. Daewha Capital is—" "I know what Daewha Capital is," Jae-hyun said. Zariah looked at him. His face was— she had never seen his face do what it was doing right now. It was sealed, completely sealed, the way something seals when the alternative is catastrophic. He was looking at the man. He was not looking at her. "Get out," he said. The man straightened his jacket. He looked at Zariah one more time with that not quite satisfaction look. "We're not the villains you've been told we are," he said, almost conversationally. "We're just investors who've been blocked from a legitimate deal for 3 years. The girl is collateral. She wasn't meant to know." He left. The door closed. Zariah stood in the hall. Her hands were at her sides. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Jae-hyun turned to look at her then, slowly. And what was in his face was not anger. It was something worse than anger. It was a man running a calculation. "Park Jin-ho," he said. "He's a collector," she said. "He reached out about a commission 8 months ago, through a gallery contact. Everything about the approach was standard." She heard herself speaking very carefully, the way you speak when you need every word to land right. "I had no idea he was connected to an investment group. I had no idea any of this was connected. The money you brought to me," he said, "as your solution. I brought it in good faith. I know you believe that." The phrase hit her like cold water. "You know I believe it," she said. "You're not sure." He was quiet. "Jae-hyun," she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. "Look at me and tell me you think I knew." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time with that way of looking that she'd started to understand. Recording, assessing, running everything through a filter built by years of learning that caring about something made it a target. "I don't think you knew," he said finally. She exhaled. "But it doesn't matter," he said, "what I think." She went still. "The immigration investigation is already active," he said. "Now there's a connection, however unintentional, between the money you brought to this marriage and the group that's been working against my organization. If that connection is found by Director Choi's investigation—" He stopped. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of his head briefly, a gesture she'd never seen him make. "They will use it to argue you were planted, a setup designed to get access to me under cover of a visa arrangement." The full shape of it assembled itself in her mind. "That's not what happened," she said. "I know. But the account trail exists," he said. "The timing exists. The pattern exists." He looked at her directly. And the people who arranged that pattern made sure it would be findable. Zaria felt the room very clearly around her, the size of it, the way sound worked in it. She felt her own breathing. They used me, she said. Yes. Seoyeon. Possibly. Or someone she works with who understood that a legitimate connection to my household, filtered through you, would be more useful than another legal filing. He said it evenly. The evenness cost him something. You weren't the target, you were the method. She wanted to sit down. She didn't. So what happens now? She said. He turned away. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to her, and she watched the line of his shoulders and thought about the folder on the kitchen table and the auction and the paper in his handwriting and all the details they'd assembled into something that was almost a story. If Director Choi finds the account trail, he said, she'll recommend denial and fraud prosecution. My legal team can fight it, but a fight takes months, and during a fight your visa status is frozen. You can't work, you can't travel, you're in legal suspension. He turned. And if the fight fails, I know what happens if it fails. Do you? He said. And it was the second time he'd said those words in that way, and this time they landed differently. Not as a challenge, as something else. Something that meant, this is my world. Are you certain you want to be standing in it? She crossed the hall. She stood in front of him, close enough that she could see the exhaustion he was carrying. Real exhaustion, the kind that lived underneath control and surfaced at the edges. I'm not leaving, she said. Zaria, I didn't come this far to leave because someone used me as a chess piece, she said. Tell me what we need to do. He looked at her. Something in him was deciding something. You need to go see Park Jin-ho, he said. She blinked. What? He doesn't know you know about the account trail. If you approach him as a client, as the artist, you can get him to talk. Find out how deep the planning goes. Whether Seoyeon was the architect or whether there's someone behind her. He paused. He won't talk to me. He'll talk to you. She understood what he was asking. She also understood what it cost him to ask it. A man who had spent years trusting no one, asking someone he'd known for less than a month to walk into a situation that had already been used to manipulate both of them. You're asking me to go back to someone who used me, she said. I'm asking you to finish the work he commissioned, he said. And listen. She looked at him. And if it goes wrong, she said, it won't. But if it does, he was quiet. Then I pull you out, whatever it takes. The word whatever from a man like Kang Jae-hyun had a specific weight. She felt it. Okay, she said. He nodded once. He turned back to the window. She saw his hand, at his side, close into a fist and then deliberately open again. There's one more thing, he said. She waited. The fraud investigation is likely to depose Min Ji, he said, because she arranged the introduction. If the account trail implicates the arrangement as planned, they'll treat her as a co-conspirator. Zaria felt that one in her chest, physically. Minji doesn't know anything about the investment group, she said. I know. She introduced me to you because she was trying to help me. That's all. I know, he said again, and the repetition was gentle in a way she hadn't heard from him before. But a legal investigation doesn't distinguish between motivation and involvement. She was the conduit. Zaria pressed her fingers to her mouth briefly. She thought about Minji's apartment, the sesame oil smell, the vanilla candle. Come over. I'll make food. The 2 seconds of silence on the phone before she'd said denied and Minji had understood everything in it. She has to be kept out of this, Zaria said. Then we need to resolve it before Choi's team gets there, he said. Which means we need the Jin-ho meeting to happen fast, the account trail explanation prepared independently, and the immigration interview to proceed as scheduled. He turned. All three. Simultaneously. She looked at him. You've been managing this organization since your father died, she said. Alone. He didn't answer. She said. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at the man in front of her. The man who stood in a hallway at 2:40 in the morning deciding things alone, who had kept a studio for 4 years without letting anyone into it, who had written their story down in compressed, deliberate handwriting and gotten the auction detail almost right except for the ending, and thought, this is what he is. This is the actual shape of it, and I am now inside it. She thought about her rule, her own private version of his rule, the one she'd been running since she walked into a cafe and negotiated her survival. This is practical. This is a transaction. This is what people do. The rule was already broken, and she knew it, and that was the most frightening thing of all. Not the investigation, not the account trail, not Seo Yan or Jin Ho or Director Choi. It was the fact that when this man had turned to look at her in the hall after the visitor left, the first thing she'd felt was not fear for herself. It was fear for him, and she had no idea what to do with that except walk forward into whatever came next. She picked up the legal brief from where she'd left it on the hall table the night before. "Tell your lawyer to prepare the account trail documentation," she said. "I'll call Jin Ho this afternoon. Set up the meeting for the end of the week." She went back to the studio. Behind her, she heard Jae-hyun say her name, very quietly, the way he'd said it the night before over the legal brief, not directive, not informational. She stopped. She didn't turn around. "Thank you," he said. She walked into the studio and closed the door and stood with her back against it in the morning light and breathed until her hands stopped shaking and told herself that what she was feeling was adrenaline, was circumstance, was the natural response of a person in an impossible situation finding unexpected ground. She told herself that. Almost believed it. She called Park Jin-ho that afternoon. Her hand was steady on the phone. She'd spent 40 minutes in the studio first, not painting, just standing at the window watching the garden below until her breathing evened out and she could sound like a person who didn't know anything she knew. He picked up on the third ring. "Zaria Asi." His voice was warm. That was the thing she hadn't been prepared for 18 months ago when he'd first reached out through the gallery. How genuinely warm he sounded, like someone who actually liked her work. Maybe he did. Maybe that was the cruelest part of it. "I've been meaning to call. How is the commission progressing?" "Well," she said, "I'd like to show you some preliminary studies. In person, if you have time this week." A brief pause. "Of course. I'm in Seoul through Friday." "Shall we say Thursday afternoon? I know a place in Hanam-dong." "Thursday works perfectly," she said. She hung up and sat on the studio floor and thought. He has a warm voice, and he used me as a chess piece, and both of those things are true about the same person. She'd learned that lesson before, in other contexts. It never got easier. The warmth was always the part that made you doubt yourself later. She went to find Jae-hyun. He was in his office. The door was open, which she'd noticed was unusual. He kept it closed when he was working through something difficult, open when he'd reached a decision. She knocked on the frame anyway. "Thursday," she said. "Hanam-dong." He suggested it. Jae-hyun looked up. "His territory. He'll feel safe." "Good," she said. "Safe people talk." He nodded. He looked at her for a moment. "I'll have Yoon nearby. You won't see him." "I don't need—" "It's not negotiable," he said. "Not unkind. Just final." She thought about arguing and decided it wasn't the hill. "Fine." She turned to go. "Zaria." She stopped. "The preliminary studies," he said. "For the commission, do you have them?" She looked at him. "I've been working on them for 6 months. Yes." "Good," he said. "Bring them. Make it real." She went back to the studio and pulled out the Jin Ho commission work, a series of large-format studies, mixed media, exploring the intersection of Korean architectural space and the color language she'd developed from her grandmother's textile work. They were good. She knew they were good. She'd been proud of them before any of this. She looked at them now and thought about the account trail and the shell company and the 200 million won that had seemed like a lifeline and turned out to be a leash. She rolled the studies carefully and put them in the portfolio case. She did not sleep well again. Thursday arrived with the particular cold clarity of a Seoul February morning that had decided to take its job seriously. The kind of cold that got into your collar no matter how you wrapped it, that made the city look like something out of a photograph. Sharp edges, hard light, everything too defined. The cafe in Hanam-dong was the expensive, quiet kind, the kind that understood its clientele wanted privacy as a service. Park Jin-ho was already there when she arrived, mid-50s, silver at his temples, the composed looseness of a man who had never had to hurry for anything. He stood when he saw her. He smiled. That warm smile. "You look well," he said. "Thank you for making time," she said, and sat down, and put the portfolio case against her leg where she could feel it. They ordered. He asked about her work. She talked about it. This part was easy. She could talk about her work from a dead stop at 3 in the morning, had done it many times, in Korean and English, and once in halting French at a gallery opening in Paris that she still wasn't sure had been real. She watched him listen and recognized the quality of his attention, genuine, informed, the attention of someone who actually understood what she was making, which made everything worse. The drinks arrived. He leaned back. "And how is married life?" She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "Unexpected," she said. He laughed softly. "Kang Jae-hyun is a particular kind of man." "He is," she agreed. "I'll admit," Jin-ho said, "I was surprised when I heard." He turned his cup slowly on its saucer. "He's not someone people generally get close to." "No," she said. "He isn't." She watched his hands. She'd learned to watch hands from Jae-hyun, who had learned it from years of rooms where faces lied and hands told the truth. Jin-ho's hands were relaxed, too relaxed maybe, for a man sitting across from the wife of someone whose organization he'd been helping to destabilize. Unless he didn't know she knew. Which was the whole point. She unrolled the first study. She watched his face shift when he saw it. And this was the thing she hadn't expected, even now, even knowing what she knew. His response to the work was real. His eyes moved across it the way eyes moved when something actually landed. He leaned forward slightly, which was involuntary, which people only did when they'd forgotten to perform appreciation and had simply felt it. "This is extraordinary," he said quietly. She said nothing. "Let him look." "The textile influence," he said, pointing at the lower third. "Your grandmother's work?" "Her patterns," Zaria said. "My color." "Yes." He sat back. He looked at her. "You know what makes this work? It's not comfortable. Most artists working this intersection make it comfortable. A synthesis. You've made a collision. Productive but unresolved." She looked at him. "Like most real things," she said. He smiled. And then he said, "How much does he know about your collectors?" Jae-hyun. Her heart did something controlled and deliberate. She kept her face completely still. "He knows you commissioned the work," she said. "He's not involved in my business. But he knows about the payment." She looked at him. "He knows I had an existing commission. Why?" Jin-ho looked at his cup. He was quiet for a moment that stretched 2 seconds longer than it should have. "There are people," he said carefully, "who would prefer that the origin of certain funds remained uncomplicated." There it was. She felt it arrive the way you feel weather change, in the body before the mind. "Uncomplicated," she said. "The ancient development has a long history," he said. "Some of the investors involved have been part of it since before Kang Sr.'s time. They have legitimate claims that have been complicated by the current leadership." He looked at her. "I'm telling you this as someone who respects you, as an artist, as a person." He paused. "The situation you've married into is more layered than you may understand." "Tell me," she said. He looked at her, assessing. She kept her eyes open and her expression clear and thought, "Talk. Just keep talking." "The commission," he said, "the funds that came through, they were structured to create a connection between you and the investment group, so that if necessary—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together. "So that if the marriage came under scrutiny, there would be a trail suggesting the arrangement was planned, by Jae-hyun's opponents, using you as access." He met her eyes. "It was Seoyeon's architecture. I was the instrument. I want you to understand that I did not know, when I commissioned your work, that it would be used this way. I knew the funds were structured. I did not know you would become involved at this level." She breathed very carefully. "But you knew afterward," she said, "when we married." A beat. "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." "No," he said. "I didn't." The warm voice, the genuine appreciation for the work, both still true. And this also true. "Who is behind Seoyeon?" she said. He looked at his hands. "That question is above the level of what I can give you." "Jin-ho, I'm already telling you more than is safe for me," he said. And the warmth was still there, but under it now she could hear something else, something thin and stretched. "The group Seoyeon represents, she's not the principal. She's a layer. There are people above her who have been trying to access Kang's legitimate holdings for 3 years, not to destroy them, but to absorb them. Fold them into a larger structure. The Incheon development is the entry point. And the fraud investigation, she said, against the marriage. He was quiet. She filed the anonymous report, Zoraya said, to create leverage. To create a choice, he said, for Jae-hyun. Resolve the investigation by stepping back from Incheon, by allowing the group a seat at the table, or watch the woman he married face prosecution. He looked at her carefully. You are not the target. You are the pressure. The room was very quiet. Her hands were in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs the way she had in the immigration office, which felt like 100 years ago, which had been 3 weeks. Thank you, she said, for telling me. I owe you that much, he said. I'm sorry it couldn't be more. She rolled the study back up. She put it in the portfolio case. She stood. I'll have the completed commission work ready in 8 weeks, she said. The quality won't suffer because of any of this. He looked up at her. Something in his face that wasn't the warmth and wasn't the calculation. Something older than both. You're remarkable, he said. I hope he understands that. She picked up the portfolio case. He's getting there, she said. She walked out. She called Jae-hyun from the street. 3 rings. Seo-yeon has a principle, she said, without preamble. She's not the architect. She's a layer. The target is Incheon and you're the obstacle. I'm the lever. A brief silence. Are you safe? The question landed before she could prepare for it. He didn't ask what she'd found out. He asked if she was safe. Yes, she said. I'm fine. Yoon can stand down. He's already walking toward you, Jae-hyun said. She turned. Yoon was 20 feet away, hands in his coat pockets, expression professionally neutral, relieved in the eyes. I need to know who's above Seo-yeon, she said. I know who it is, Jae-hyun said, and his voice had gone to that other register. The stripped one, the one she'd first heard through the wall at 2 a.m. I've known for 6 weeks. I was waiting for confirmation. She stopped walking. You knew, she said. I suspected. Who? A pause. Come home, he said. I'll explain everything. She stood on a Hanamdong street in the February cold with the portfolio case in her hand and Yoon approaching from 20 feet and the city moving around her in its enormous indifferent way, and thought, he said, come home. Not come back. Not return to the building. Home. I'm on my way, she said. I was waiting in the main hall. No jacket, sleeves pushed up, which she'd come to understand was what he looked like when he'd been working through something for hours and had stopped caring about the performance of composure. There were 2 phones on the hall table and a folder she didn't recognize. She came through the door. She looked at him. Tell me, she said. He picked up the folder. He held it out. She took it. Inside was a photograph. A man in his 60s, photographed from a distance, at what appeared to be a private event. She didn't know the face. She looked at the name printed beneath it. Chairman Oh Byung-chul. He was my father's oldest business partner, Jae-hyun said. They built the first 3 KH Group properties together. In the early 90s. He crossed his arms. When my father got sick, he came to visit, regularly. I assumed it was grief, old friendship. He looked at the photograph in her hands. 18 months ago, after my father died, I started reviewing the original partnership agreements. There were irregularities, small ones, the kind you only find if you're looking. He was skimming, she said. For 15 years, Jae-hyun said. Small amounts, never enough to trigger anything. Using shell structures that my father's accounting team didn't have the sophistication to catch. He looked at the folder. The Incheon development was my father's idea, but the community element, the component that makes it unprofitable in the short term and valuable in the long term, that was something Oh Byung-chul never agreed with. He wanted the land, the development potential, not the community component. So when your father died, Zarya said. He moved, Jae-hyun said. He brought in external investors. Seo-yeon is his daughter's closest friend. She's been his access point into my personal circle for 4 years. He paused. The engagement. Was that his arrangement too? She said. His jaw tightened. I don't know. I've asked myself that for 2 years. He looked away. What I know is that when I broke it off, he started moving externally. Injunctions. Investment pressure. The fraud report. Zoraya looked at the photograph. She thought about a man visiting a dying friend, sitting at his bedside, appearing to grieve. He was never grieving, she said. He was waiting, Jae-hyun said. She put the folder down. So what do we do? He looked at her directly. I have enough to file a civil case against him for the 15-year fraud. My legal team has been building it for 8 months. If I file, it neutralizes the Incheon pressure. It puts him on defense and pulls the investment group's backing because they won't want association with a fraud case. Then file, she said. If I file, he said carefully, he will accelerate the immigration investigation. He has contacts in the authority. He will push Director Choi's team to move fast before my case is established. The interview gets moved up, potentially to next week. She felt that land. How ready are we? She said. He looked at her. And the look was not the assessing look, not the recording look. It was something else. Something that recognized her. Specifically her, Zariah Bennett, the person standing in his hall, not the situation she represented. We're ready, he said. But there's a risk. He paused. Director Choi is thorough. The account trail from Jin-ho's commission will be in her brief. She will ask you about it directly. You'll need to explain it in a way that acknowledges the connection without appearing to have concealed it. So I tell the truth, Zariah said. All of it, he said. Including the fact that you didn't know. Including the fact that Jin-ho confirmed it to you today. He held her gaze. You have to walk in there and tell an investigator that you were used without your knowledge and that you disclosed it the moment you understood it. That's what happened, she said. Yes, he said. But saying a true thing and having a stranger believe it are different skills. She thought about that. I've been saying true things to strangers my entire career, she said. Every painting I've ever made is a true thing said to a stranger. Something moved across his face. Fast. Involuntary. File the case, she said. I'll handle the interview. He nodded once. He turned to pick up one of the phones. Jae-hyun, she said. He stopped. When this is over, she said, when the interview is done and the case is filed and all of this is resolved, she held his gaze. We should talk about what this is. The silence was very specific. Yes, he said. We should. He made the call. The civil case filing hit the news within 6 hours. Zariah was in the studio when Yoon knocked and told her. She'd known it was coming, had felt it building from the moment Jae-hyun picked up the phone, but the speed of it still surprised her. By evening, it was on financial news channels. By 9 o'clock, 3 journalists had called the building's main line. Mrs. O handled them with a glacial efficiency that Zariah was beginning to genuinely admire. Jae-hyun was in his office with his lawyer until midnight. She didn't bother him. She made tea. She left a cup outside his office door. She went back to the studio. She painted. Not the project work, not the commission. Something else. She didn't plan it. Her hand just moved, the way it moved when she wasn't supervising herself, when the work was smarter than she was and knew what it needed before she did. When she stepped back at 1 in the morning, she looked at what she'd made. A man standing in rain. Not metaphorical rain, specific rain, the kind that fell on Seoul in late autumn, cold and relentless. He was standing at the edge of something. It wasn't clear what. A street, a ledge, an ending. With his back partially turned and his head slightly bowed. Not defeat in his posture, something more precise than that. The specific posture of a person who has been carrying weight for so long, they've stopped registering it as weight and have started registering it as just the shape of standing up. She put her brush down. She turned the canvas to face the wall, same as she'd done with the first one, and then she stopped and turned it back. She looked at it. She left it facing out. The interview notification arrived the next morning. 7 days. Director Choi's team had accelerated exactly as Jae-hyun had predicted. The notification was formal, precise, and entirely without warmth, which was appropriate, Zariah thought, because it was a document designed to determine whether her life here was real, and documents that determine things rarely had warmth. She brought it to Jae-hyun's office. He read it. He read it again. He set it on the desk. 7 days, she said. Yes. Then we work, she said. They worked. For 5 days they worked through every question in the expected framework until the answers lived in Zariah's body the way things lived in her body when they were true. Not memorized, just known. They sat across from each other at the dining room table after dinner, and he asked her questions in the flat tone of someone trying to find the weakness in a structure, and she answered. And sometimes he stopped her and said, "Too careful, say it differently." And sometimes he said nothing because it was right. On the third night, she asked him something she hadn't asked before. "Tell me about your father." He looked up from the legal brief. "For the interview," she said, "they'll ask about our conversations, things we know about each other's families. I know the facts. I don't know him." He was quiet for a moment. His hand was flat on the table. "He was a carpenter's son," Jae-hyun said finally, "from a village in South Gyeongsang. He came to Seoul with 40,000 won and a contact name that turned out to be useless." He looked at the table. "He built everything from nothing, not quickly, not cleanly, the way things actually get built, slowly, and with costs he didn't always talk about." "Did he talk to you?" "About the costs." A pause. "Toward the end, when the treatment stopped working." He shifted slightly in his chair. "He told me the Incheon project was the one he wanted to be remembered for. Not the towers, not the commercial properties. That one block in Incheon where people could afford to stay." He looked up. "He said it was the only thing he'd built that his own father would have recognized." Zoraya said nothing. She didn't write anything down. "You don't need to memorize it," he said. "I'm not memorizing it," she said. "I'm just holding it." He looked at her. She looked back. The table between them was covered in legal briefs and printouts, and the accumulated evidence of a life they'd been assembling detail by detail. And it occurred to her, not for the first time but more clearly than before, that the thing they'd been building might be more real than either of them had contracted for. On the sixth night, Oh Byung-chul moved. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. A messenger arrived at the building at 10 in the evening. Not a legal courier, not a formal representative, just a man in a coat with an envelope and eyes that were doing the work of saying something the envelope couldn't say in print. Jae-hyun read the letter in the hall. His expression didn't change. He handed it to Zoraya. It was brief. 2 paragraphs. The first offered a settlement, a restructured agreement on Incheon that gave Oh Byung-chul's group a 40% stake. The second stated plainly that if the civil case was not withdrawn before the immigration interview, the fraud report would be expanded with additional documentation that would make Zoraya's culpability difficult to disprove, regardless of the facts. Zoraya read it twice. She handed it back. "He's threatening to fabricate evidence," she said. "Yes." "Can he?" "He has people in the right places," Jae-hyun said. "If he moves fast enough, yes." She felt her chest tighten. Not fear exactly, something adjacent to fury. "Then we move faster," she said. "The interview is tomorrow," he said. "Then tonight," she said. "What do we need tonight?" He looked at the letter. He looked at her. And she saw it. The thing he kept behind his face, briefly visible again, the way it had been in the hall after the visitor left, the way it had been in the studio doorway at 11 at night. Every year of it, right there, and under it, something she recognized because she'd felt the same thing. Looking at a painting, she'd turned to the wall and turned back. He moved before she expected him to. 2 steps across the hall, and his hands were on her face, and he kissed her. Not the way she'd imagined, and she'd stopped pretending she hadn't imagined it, somewhere around day 5 in this building, when he'd left cold coffee outside her studio door without saying anything. Not smooth, not cinematic. His hands were slightly cold, and he kissed her like a man who had been deciding against it for 3 weeks and had run out of arguments. She kissed him back. Because she had also run out of arguments. When they separated, he was looking at her with that direct look that recorded things, but it wasn't recording this time. It was something else entirely. "That wasn't part of the contract," he said. "No," she said. "It wasn't." His thumb moved once across her cheekbone. Then he stepped back. He picked up his phone. "I'm calling my lawyer," he said. "We need everything filed by 6 a.m. I was already dialing, already moving, already the man who ran things, except his voice when he said her name next was different. "Zoraya, go sleep. You need to be clear tomorrow." She looked at him. She thought, the rule he made in a cafe is already gone and both of us know it. She thought, tomorrow we walk into a government office and tell a stranger our story, and the stranger decides if it's real. She thought, the frightening thing isn't that she might not believe us. She went up the stairs. She stopped at the landing. Below her, Jae-hyun was on the phone. the civil case filing moving through the night like water cutting stone, his voice precise and low and absolutely certain. He looked up once and found her on the landing and held her gaze for 2 seconds before looking back at his phone. 2 seconds. She'd learned to count the things that mattered. She went to her room. She looked at her mother's photograph. She thought about what her mother would say, which was probably something practical and direct, and underneath the practicality, something warm. She thought, I didn't come here to fall in love. She thought, I also didn't come here to paint his loneliness onto a canvas and leave it facing out. She lay down. She breathed. The city existed outside the window. Tomorrow they would walk into the office of Director Choi, who had a documented success rate and no interest in sentiment, and they would sit in separate rooms and answer the same questions from different angles, and every gap they hadn't closed would open like a fault line, and either the thing they'd built would hold or it wouldn't. She pressed her hand flat against the mattress. She thought about his hands on her face. She thought, it has to hold. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark with her hand flat on the mattress and listened to the building settle around her, the sounds a structure makes when everyone in it is awake and pretending otherwise. And at 4:30, she stopped pretending and got up. She showered. She dressed carefully, not because she was performing, but because she understood that how you carried yourself into a room told people things before you opened your mouth. And she wanted Director Choi to see a woman who had considered every detail and was not afraid of being looked at. She put on the same earrings she'd worn to the foundation dinner, her grandmother's earrings, the ones that felt like home. She went downstairs at 5:15. Tae-hyun was already in the kitchen. He hadn't slept either. She could see it in the set of his eyes, the particular flatness that wasn't tiredness, so much as the residue of a night spent holding something in place through force of will. He was in a dark suit. He had coffee. He poured a second cup without being asked and pushed it across the counter. She took it. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen counter and drank coffee in silence for a while. Outside, Seoul was still dark. The city existed in that specific pre-dawn register, not quiet, never quiet, but a different frequency than daytime. Lower, more honest somehow. How did the filing go? She said. Submitted at 5:47 a.m., he said. My lawyer confirmed receipt. He looked at his cup. It's in the system. He can't make it disappear. But he can still expand the fraud report. He already tried, Jae-hyun said. At 2 in the morning, his people submitted supplementary documentation to Director Choi's office. He looked up. My lawyer filed a preemptive rebuttal at 3:15, including Jin-ho's disclosure to you and the account trail explanation. Everything you told me yesterday went into it. She processed this. You were working all night. Yes. You should have told me. He looked at her. You needed to sleep. I didn't sleep. Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile, the thing that lived next to one. No, he said. I know. She looked at him across the counter. The kitchen light was the color of early morning, yellow, specific, the kind of light that didn't flatter anything but showed everything clearly. He looked tired and certain, and like a man who had spent one night doing the work of 3 and would not say so. She thought, this is who he is. Not the reputation, not the sealed face, not the rules made in cafes over cold coffee. This. She drank her coffee. Ready, she said. Yes, he said. The Immigration Authority building was different at 8 in the morning than it had been at the afternoon hour of her original appointment, the one that had started all of this. The light came in at a lower angle. The waiting room had different people in it, earlier hour people, quieter and more certain, or maybe just more awake. Director Choi's office was on the 4th floor. They rode the elevator in silence. Jae-hyun stood slightly ahead of her, which she'd noticed was a habit. Not protective exactly, more like positioning. Knowing where the room was before anyone else entered it. The doors opened. Director Choi was waiting in the corridor. She was younger than Zariah had expected from the documentation. Late 40s maybe, with short hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the specific economy of movement that belonged to people who had spent years in rooms where everything mattered and nothing was decorative. She looked at both of them in one efficient sweep. Mr. Kang, Ms. Bennett. She extended her hand. Her grip was brief and exact. I appreciate your punctuality. She looked at Zariah. We'll see you separately. Mr. Kang, if you'll wait in room 2, my colleague will be with you shortly. Ms. Bennett, please come with me. This was expected. They'd prepared for it. Zoraya looked at Jae-hyun and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything because they didn't need to. She followed Director Choi. The interview room was small and had a window that faced a concrete wall and a table with a recorder on it that Choi activated without commentary. She sat. She opened a folder. She looked at Zoraya over her reading glasses. I want to be transparent with you, Choi said. This interview is part of an active investigation into the legitimacy of your spousal visa application. You've been notified of the investigation, and you are not legally required to answer questions without representation. However, your lawyer has already submitted documentation on your behalf this morning. She looked at the folder. I've read it. Good, Zoraya said. Choi looked up. Let's start simply. Tell me how you met your husband. So she told her. She told her about Mapogu, about the mural on Bukseong Street, about an afternoon 18 months ago when a man she didn't know stood in front of something she'd made for 11 minutes without saying anything. She told it the way she told true things, not smoothly, not in a prepared sequence, but the way memory actually worked, with the texture still in it, the way the afternoon light had been, the sound of the street, the specific quality of his attention that had unnerved her and which she hadn't known what to do with until much later. Choi wrote. She asked questions. She asked them from angles, which Zoraya had been told to expect, the same detail approach from 3 different directions to find the inconsistencies. There were no inconsistencies because there was nothing to be inconsistent. It had happened, all of it. The visa crisis, Choi said, walk me through the decision to approach him. Zoraya walked her through it, the denial, Minji's apartment, the specific calculus of a woman with 48 hours and one viable option, and enough self-knowledge to know that refusing to do something because it was frightening was a luxury she didn't have. And the financial arrangement, Choi said. You brought capital to the marriage. Yes. From a commission from a collector named Park Jin-ho. Yes. And you are now aware that Park Jin-ho has connections to an investment group in active legal conflict with your husband's organization. I became aware of that, Zoraya said, 3 days ago, when I met with him about the commission and he disclosed it. She held Choi's gaze. That disclosure is in the rebuttal documentation my husband's lawyer filed this morning. I reported it the same day it was told to me. Why did you meet with him? Because my husband asked me to, she said. He needed to understand the scope of the account trail before you found it. Choi was quiet for a moment. She looked at the folder. You're saying your husband sent you to gather intelligence from a hostile actor. I'm saying my husband trusted me enough to ask me to help, Zoraya said. And I did. The room was very quiet. Ms. Bennett, Choi said. She took her reading glasses off and set them on the table and looked at Zoraya with the face she'd been keeping behind the procedure. Not unkind. Older than her age in the way that accumulated years of watching people lie gave you something extra in the eyes. The supplementary documentation submitted on behalf of the opposing party this morning alleged that your marriage was architected as a mechanism to infiltrate Kang Jae-hyun's organization, that you were recruited and placed deliberately. I know what it alleged, Zoraya said. Do you understand how it looks? From the outside. I understand exactly how it looks, she said. A Black American woman with no obvious connection to Korean business circles marries one of the most prominent men in Seoul under emergency circumstances using money that turns out to be connected to his opponents. From the outside, yes, I understand how it looks. Then help me understand how it is, Choi said. Zarya put her hands on the table. Flat, open, the way she'd laid them out in the immigration office a month ago in front of a different officer who hadn't looked at her. She waited until Choi was looking at her directly. I came to this country 6 years ago, she said, with 2 suitcases and a portfolio and enough money to last 3 months if I was very careful. I did not have connections. I did not have family here. I had work, and I had the belief that the work was worth building a life around. She breathed. I spent 6 years learning this city, learning the language, learning the specific way Seoul moves and breathes, and which neighborhoods remember what they were and which ones are trying to forget. She paused. When my visa was denied, I was not looking for a way into Kang Jae-hyun's organization. I was looking for a way to stay in the city I had spent 6 years making into my home. Choi said nothing. The money was a coincidence that was made to look like a plan, Zariah said, by people who understood that the cleanest frame is one that uses true things. It's true that Park Jin-ho commissioned my work. It's true that I brought the funds to the marriage. It's true that the timing is suspicious. She looked at Choi steadily. It's also true that I disclosed it the moment I understood it, at cost to myself, because that's what you do when you've been used. You don't protect the people who used you. You tell the truth. Silence. Let me ask you something, Choi said. Her voice was different, still professional, but with something that had shifted underneath. What would you have done if the marriage had fallen through, if he'd said no? Zariah thought about that. She thought about the stairwell in Minji's building where she'd made the call, the way her hands had been shaking, the specific texture of having no options and making one anyway. I would have gone home, she said, to Atlanta. I would have spent 6 months hating it, and then I would have found another way back, because this is where my work is and where my life is, and some things you don't walk away from just because it gets hard. Choi picked up her glasses. She put them back on. She made a note. Tell me something about your husband, she said. Not from the file. Not a fact I can look up. Zariah thought about the folder on the kitchen table. The handwriting, February 14th, charity auction. You bid on the piece by the sculptor from Jeju. I noticed you because you were the only person in the room who looked at the work instead of the price. He counts things when he's nervous, she said. He'd never say he's nervous, but he counts. Documents, steps, minutes. She paused. His father came from nothing and built everything and died before he could see what the work became. Jae-hyun carries that. Not as pride, as weight. The difference matters. Choi was looking at her. He kept a studio in his building for 4 years, Zariah said. Nobody used it. He kept it because he didn't want to close the door on the possibility of someone who needed light to work. She held Choi's gaze. That's who he is. That's what I know about him that isn't in a file. The interview room was very still. Director Choi looked at her folder for a long moment. Then she looked up. I'd like to take a short break, she said, and then I have a few more questions about the account trail documentation. Of course, Zariah said. The break lasted 20 minutes. Zariah sat in the small room and looked at the concrete wall through the window and thought about nothing with great concentration, which was a skill she had developed for opening nights and difficult conversations and the hour before anything important happened. The mind needed to be empty before it could be useful. She breathed. She looked at the wall. She waited. When Choi came back, she had a second folder. She sat down. She opened it. She looked at it for a moment, and then she looked at Zariah with something that Zariah recognized. Not sympathy, because Choi wasn't a woman who trafficked in sympathy during professional function, but something adjacent. The look of someone who has assembled all the information and arrived at a conclusion and is deciding how to deliver it without softening something that is the shape it is. The supplementary documentation submitted by the opposing party, Choi said, contained a series of fabricated correspondence, emails purportedly between you and a representative of Daewha Capital, the shell company connected to Jin-ho's commission, dated 4 months before your marriage. Zariah's hands were flat on the table. Fabricated, she said. The metadata on the documents was inconsistent with the dates on the correspondence, Choi said. The files were created 10 days ago. The email headers were also spoofed using a domain that didn't exist at the date of the alleged correspondence. She paused. It was not a sophisticated fabrication. It was done quickly. Because they found out about the civil case filing, Zariah said. They moved fast. That is a reasonable inference, Choi said. What is not an inference is that someone submitted falsified evidence to this office as part of an active immigration fraud investigation. She closed the folder. That is a criminal matter. It has been referred to the appropriate department. Zariah exhaled, a long, slow breath that went all the way down. The account trail question, Choi said, is satisfactorily addressed by the Jin-ho disclosure, the preemptive rebuttal, and the fabrication finding. My recommendation will reflect that. Zariah looked at her. That means, she started. It means the investigation is closed, Choi said. The application proceeds to standard review. Given the documented evidence of a genuine relationship and the resolution of the fraud allegation, approval is the likely outcome. She looked at Zariah over her glasses. I said likely, not certain. Standard review is standard review. I understand, Zariah said. Choi studied her for a moment. You've been in Korea 6 years. Yes. You speak the language. Well enough. Your work has been exhibited here. 5 times. The 6th is scheduled for spring. Choi was quiet. Then she said something that wasn't in her professional register at all. It was smaller, more human, the voice of a woman who had spent years watching people fight for the right to stay somewhere. It shows that you belong here. Some people have it and some don't. You do. Zaria's throat was tighter than she'd expected. Thank you, she said. Choi stood. She extended her hand. The formal notification will come within 5 business days. In the meantime, she almost smiled, or something in the vicinity. Go home. Jae-hyun was in the corridor when she came out. He was standing by the window at the end of the hall. His interview had ended before hers. She could tell by the way he was positioned, someone who had been waiting for a while and had settled into it. He looked up when he heard her steps. She walked toward him. He read her face. She watched him read it. The specific attention he gave to her face now that he'd stopped pretending he wasn't paying attention, and she watched the tension in his shoulders change. Closed, she said. He exhaled. One breath. The only sign he would give in a corridor in a government building of what that meant. The fabricated emails, she said. They were poorly made. Choi found it in the metadata. He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, there was something in his face she'd never seen there before. Raw relief, uncurated, the kind that escapes before you can manage it. Come on, he said. Let's go. They rode the elevator down in silence. In the lobby, he held the door for her. Outside, the cold air hit them both, and Zariah stopped on the sidewalk and tipped her head back for a second, just a second, and felt February in her face and thought, still here, still here. He stopped beside her. She lowered her head and looked at him. It's not final yet, she said. 5 business days. It will be fine, he said. You sound certain. I am certain, he said. And from him, from this man who calibrated everything, the words had a specific gravity. A taxi passed. Somewhere down the block, a food cart owner was arguing cheerfully with a delivery driver about where to park. Seoul, doing what Seoul did, enormous and alive and indifferent to the specific weight of what had just happened on the 4th floor of a government building. What did they ask you, she said. In your interview. He was quiet for a moment. They asked me to describe the moment I knew the marriage was more than a contract. She looked at him. What did you say? He was looking at something past her shoulder, down the street, the way he looked at things when he was deciding how much to give. Then he looked at her. I told them about the painting, he said, the one in the studio, of a man standing in the rain. He paused. I told them I found it facing out when she'd turned all the others to the wall. I told them I understood what that meant. Zariah felt something move through her chest slowly, like warmth moving through cold water. That was enough? She said. Choi asked me to describe the man in the painting, he said. I told her he was someone who had been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down. She wrote that down. He paused. Then she asked if I was that man. I said yes. Zariah looked at him. Then she asked if I still was. She waited. I told her, he said. That was harder to answer. She reached out and took his hand. Not the way they'd held hands at the foundation dinner. The performance of it. The light pressure of a managed public moment. She just took it, plain and deliberate. His hand was cold from the February air, and he let her take it and held on with the specific grip of a man who had decided against doing so for a long time and had stopped deciding. They stood on the sidewalk outside the Immigration Authority building in the February cold of a Seoul morning and held on. Let's go home, she said. He said, yes. Oh Byung-chul was arrested 12 days later. Zariah was in the studio when Jae-hyun told her. He came to the door the way he always came to the studio door, not knocking exactly, more a presence in the frame that she'd learned to feel the way you learn to feel weather. It happened this morning, he said. The criminal referral from Choi's office combined with the civil fraud case. They moved on him at 7 a.m. She set her brush down. She turned. His face was not relief, because this wasn't relief. It was the face of a man who had been holding something up for a long time and has just felt the other person take their side of it. Not rest, just distributed weight. SEO yawn, she said. Cooperating, he said, in exchange for a reduced charge. She gave them everything about the fabricated documents. He looked at the window. She said she hadn't known that was the plan, that they told her it would only be financial pressure. He paused. I don't know if I believe her. Does it matter? Zoraya said. He thought about it. Not anymore, he said. She looked at him. How do you feel? He looked at her. The question, from her, produced a specific expression. Not surprised because she'd been asking him versions of it for weeks, but something that still hadn't entirely found its footing. A man relearning a language he'd stopped speaking. Tired, he said. And something else I don't have a word for yet. You'll find it, she said. He looked at the canvas behind her. What are you working on? She stepped aside. It was the Incheon project. She'd been building it for 10 days. Not documentation this time, not functional material. An actual painting. Large format, the largest she'd worked in since the Bukseong Street mural. The neighborhood as it was and as it could be, layered, the old and the new. Not as opposition, but as conversation. The woman outside her shop, the stone path, the building fronts that had been there for 40 years. And in the lower right corner, barely visible, the specific color she'd developed from her grandmother's textile work, the rust bleeding into ochre, threaded through the architecture like something warm in something old. Chae Hyun looked at it for a long time. She watched him look at it. She counted without meaning to. 11 minutes. He looked at her. He understood that she knew. It's for the community center, she said. When the development opens. If you want it. His jaw moved. He looked back at the painting. Yes, he said. I want it. The visa approval came on the 4th business day, not the 5th. The formal letter arrived in this morning. Zaria was in the kitchen. Mrs. O brought it without comment and set it on the counter with the particular precision she gave to things she considered important, which was a language Zaria had learned to read. She opened it. She read it once. She set it down. She looked out the kitchen window at the garden, the structured plantings, the stone path, the wall at the end, and thought about a woman in a small apartment above a dry cleaner in Mapo-gu who had packed a suitcase and a portfolio case, and her mother's photograph and made a phone call from a stairwell because she refused to be removed from the city she'd made her home. She picked up the letter and went to find Jae Hyun. He was in his office. Door open. She knocked on the frame anyway because some habits were good to keep. He looked up. She held up the letter. He was across the room in 4 steps, which was the fastest she'd ever seen him move toward anything. He read it. He read it with the focus he gave to every document, but his face was doing something underneath the focus. He set the letter down. He looked at her. Permanent residency, he said. In 6 months, she said. Standard pathway. The spousal visa holds the status until then. He looked at the letter, then at her. You can stay. I'm staying, she said. Something happened in his face that she thought she might be the only person alive who'd seen. The thing behind the thing, whatever had been maintained for years through discipline and isolation and the specific armor of a man who'd learned early that caring was expensive. It didn't collapse. It didn't break dramatically. It just released. Like tension leaving a hand that's been gripping something for too long. He pulled her in and held her. It wasn't graceful. His arms came around her with the slight awkwardness of a man who was out of practice at this, who had the motion but had lost the ease of it, and she pressed her face into his shoulder and thought, this is what real feels like. Not the performance of it, this. They stood in his office with the letter on the desk and the city outside the window and held on, neither of them speaking because there wasn't anything to say that would improve the moment. After a while she said, into his shoulder, we should probably talk about the contract. She felt him breathe. Yes. It accomplished what it was supposed to. Yes. Which means technically, Zoraya. I'm just saying technically there's a provision for dissolution after Zoraya. He pulled back enough to look at her. His hands were on either side of her face, cold fingers, the same as on the night before the interview. He looked at her with the directness she'd learned to meet straight on. I am not invoking the dissolution provision. She looked at him. Is that what you want? She said. Quietly. Not a challenge, just the question, plain. No, he said. It is not what I want. Then say what you want. He looked at her for a moment. The man who calibrated everything, who counted things, who had built walls to replace the people who'd torn them down, and kept a studio with consistent morning light for 4 years without knowing why. "I want you to move your things out of the third-floor room," he said. "I want you to paint whatever you want on whatever wall you want in this building. I want you to cook things that smell like your grandmother's kitchen and leave your brushes in water too long and count things under your breath when you're nervous." He paused. "I want to learn what the rest of your story looks like." She looked at him. "That's a lot of wants," she said. "Yes," he said. "I've been holding them for a while." She put her hands over his. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She stood on her toes and kissed him, and this time it didn't have the quality of something that had run out of arguments. It had the quality of a choice, deliberate and open-eyed, the way she made every choice that mattered. 6 months later, the Incheon Community Development opened. It was a Saturday in August, heat sitting on Seoul with the particular damp certainty of a Korean summer. The ceremony was in the afternoon, modest by the standards of the KH Group's other openings. No grand speeches, no elaborate production. Just the neighborhood. The residents who'd stayed through 3 years of uncertainty. The older woman whose family had been in the same building for 40 years, who stood near the entrance with her grandson and ran her hand along the wall of the new structure and said something in dialect too quiet for anyone but the people next to her to hear. The mural went up the week before the opening. Zarya had spent the last month at the site. Her hands were permanently paint-stained in the specific way of large exterior work, under the nails, in the creases of the knuckles, the back of her forearms where the brush had caught. Mrs. O had given up on the laundry situation with remarkable grace. The mural covered the south-facing wall of the community center, 12 meters wide, 4 meters tall, which was the largest surface she'd ever worked. The rust and ochre of her grandmother's textile work threaded through Korean architectural forms, the curve of a traditional roofline, the specific geometry of a pojangmacha cart at the edge of a street, the window of the old woman's shop rendered in warm amber, and running through it, barely visible, unless you were looking, a figure. A man standing at the edge of something, head slightly bowed, the posture of someone carrying weight that was slowly, finally, becoming lighter. She didn't tell anyone who it was. She didn't need to. Jae-hyun stood in front of it for a long time on the day it was finished. She came to stand beside him. He didn't look away from it. "He doesn't look lonely anymore," he said. She looked at the figure. "No," she said. "He doesn't." He took her hand. She leaned into his shoulder for a moment. Around them, the neighborhood moved. Children on bikes, the smell of someone's dinner starting, the specific sound of a summer evening in a Korean working-class neighborhood that had refused to be erased. "Thank you," he said. The way he said those 2 words was different now than the first time, months ago, in the afternoon after the Incheon injunction was withdrawn. The first time had been careful, calibrated, a man measuring the cost of gratitude. This was nothing like that. This was just the truth, offered plain. "You keep thanking me," she said. "You keep doing things worth thanking you for." She laughed. It came out full and real, the way her laughs came out when she wasn't monitoring them. He turned to look at her when she laughed, which was something she'd noticed months ago and still hadn't gotten used to. The way he oriented toward it, like light. Minji came to the opening. She'd been formally deposed by Director Choi's investigation and cleared in the same week, which had cost her 2 days of lost work and a level of stress that had put her off coffee for 3 weeks, which for Minji was the equivalent of a significant personal crisis. She stood in front of the mural for a while. Then she stood beside Zarya and looked at it and said, "You painted him." "I painted a figure." "Zarya." "I painted a figure." Minji looked at her sideways. "You are the worst liar I have ever met in my life." "I'm an excellent liar when it matters. You just told Director Choi a truth that saved your marriage." "That's different." Minji put her arm around Zarya's shoulders, and they stood there for a moment. 2 women who had known each other for 4 years through apartments and exhibitions and difficult nights, and at least 1 phone call from a stairwell that had changed everything. "Are you happy?" Minji said. Not lightly. The real question. Zarya looked at the mural. She looked at the neighborhood. She looked at Jae-hyun across the courtyard, talking to the old woman whose family had been in the building for 40 years. listening with the full attention that he gave to things that mattered to him, which she'd learned was how you knew what mattered to him. "Yes," she said. Minji squeezed her shoulder. "Good," she said. "You were terrible to be around when you were pretending you weren't." "I was not." 3 weeks in, Minji said cheerfully, "I told my cousin something had changed, and he said, 'How do you know?' And I said, 'Because she stopped complaining about him.'" Zaraya opened her mouth. "You never complained about him," Minji said. "Not once. That's how I knew." That evening, after the opening, they drove home through the city in the particular amber light of a Seoul. August evening, the kind that made everything look like it was being remembered while it was still happening. Zaraya was in the passenger seat. She had paint in her hair. She hadn't noticed until Mrs. O had pointed it out that morning, and then declined to do anything about it with the serenity of a woman who had made her peace with the situation months ago. Chae-hyun was driving. He drove the way he did everything that wasn't business, without the managed quality, with the loose ease of a man who had somewhere to go and was not performing going there. "The collector from Berlin confirmed," she said. "The international show, February." He glanced at her. "When did that come through?" "This morning. I was going to tell you after the opening. February. 3 weeks in Berlin, then a leg in Paris if they can work the logistics." She looked out the window. "It's a long time to be away." He was quiet. "Come with me," she said. He looked at her. "Not the whole time," she said. "A week. Whatever you can manage. I want you to see what the work looks like in a different context." She paused. "And I want you to see Paris. I don't think you've ever been somewhere without a meeting attached to it." He looked back at the road. His jaw moved in the way it moved when he was deciding something, the small tells she'd catalogued in the first week and never mentioned. "The Incheon second phase proposal has a February timeline," he said. "I know," she said. "I looked at your calendar." He was quiet for a moment. "You looked at my calendar." "You leave it open on your desk," she said. "I didn't search for it." Another moment, then, "I'll see what I can manage," which she had learned meant yes. She looked out at Seoul going past, the pojangmacha carts being folded up for the night, the convenience store lights, the couples walking, the old men with their hands behind their backs, the city that was enormous and alive and had never been required to be anything other than exactly what it was. 6 years. She'd spent 6 years learning this city street by street, and it was still teaching her things. She reached over and put her hand on his arm. He didn't look at her. He put his hand over hers. They drove. Later that night, after the city had quieted to its nighttime frequency, she was in the studio. Not working, just there. She'd developed the habit in the months since the investigation closed, coming to the studio at the end of days that had been significant, not to paint, but to sit with whatever the day had been. The morning light would be different tomorrow. The canvas waiting would want something she hadn't figured out yet. She heard his footsteps in the hall. She heard them stop at the studio door. "Come in," she said. He came in. He was in the clothes he changed into at home. Not a suit, not the curated professional version of himself, just clothes. He looked at the room. He looked at her on the floor with her back against the supply cabinet, knees bent, paint-stained hands in her lap. He sat down beside her, not across the room, right beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching and then touching. They sat in the studio in the quiet of a house that had stopped being silent the way it used to be silent. She thought about an officer who had said 48 hours like a clock. She thought about a stairwell and a phone call and a man who answered in 4 rings. She thought about a folder on a kitchen table in handwriting that was compressed and deliberate and had gotten the auction detail almost right except for the ending, which she'd corrected in pen, which he'd kept. She thought about the rule made in a cafe over cold coffee. Never mistake this for love. The worst rule. She'd told him so, and he'd agreed and retired it and made a new one. Love me every day, and never leave. She told him she could work with that. He'd said he was aware it was more than he'd originally offered. She'd told him that was typically how good things worked, in her experience. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, Seoul breathed. A city that had let her in slowly, and then all at once. A language she dreamed in now, not in fragments, but in whole sentences. The kind of fluency that lived in the body rather than the mind. A studio with consistent morning light. A house that smelled like sesame oil and sometimes like her grandmother's cooking and always, now, like paint. She thought about her mother's photograph on the desk in the room she'd moved out of. It was on the windowsill now, in the room she shared with the man beside her, next to his watch, and the folder he was always going to be reviewing and the photograph she'd found weeks ago. Small, kept in the inside pocket of a jacket, of a man who looked like a younger version of Jae-hyun, caught mid-laugh. The kind of photograph taken by someone who loved what they were looking at. She hadn't asked about it. She'd known. He'd told her anyway, one night in the way he'd been slowly learning to tell things, plainly, without making them larger or smaller than they were. My father. The year before he got sick. He was laughing because I dropped something on the construction site and tried to pretend I hadn't. He'd looked at the photograph for a moment. He always thought I was more careful than I was. She'd said, "You are careful." He'd said, "Yes." A pause. "Too careful, maybe." She'd said, "You're working on it." He'd said, "Yes, I am." She was working on things too. She'd always been working on things. That was not the part that changed. The part that changed was what she was building them toward. She closed her eyes. Beside her, his hand found hers. The way it always did now. Not a performance, not a management of appearances, just the specific gravity of two people who had decided toward each other and kept deciding. She held on. He held on. The city went on being the city. The studio held its morning light in reserve for tomorrow. The mural in Incheon dried on a south-facing wall in a neighborhood that had refused to be erased. And in the lower right corner, the rust bled into ochre the way it always had. The way things warm up slowly, the way things last. Outside the window, Seoul. Inside, the small human sounds of a life that had been built out of impossible circumstances and deliberate choices, and two people who had run out of rules and decided that was not, after all, the disaster it had seemed. It was, in fact, the beginning.